to Planetary Gig Talk, Tales of Music and Magic. I'm your host, Jefferson Glassy, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gig Society, whose mission is creating unity through music, or as I like to say, making connections through music with the intention of bringing peace. And today I am in Studio One at the worldwide headquarters of the Planetary Gig Society, and our guest is connected via Zoom from Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm so delighted to be able to talk today with a fabulous musician, violin player, Tracy Silverman. Tracy, thank you so much for taking time to be with us.
Hey, Jeff. Great to be here.
Thank you. So I won't tell a lie. I will say that the reason that I sought you out to talk with you is because my friend Michael Cott suggested that I ask you to do an interview. And so I said, sure thing, and I reached out to your webpage, and you're very nice and agreed to do that, so thanks again.
Any friend of Michael's a friend of mine.
Cool, he's quite an amazing person.
Yes.
So I know that you really accomplished player and Juilliard and all those things. We can talk about some of that, but I love to ask, I'm always curious, how did music come into your life? Were your parents musical? Was there music in your house? Did they play violin? Did you take lessons early, or how did that happen to you?
Well, both of my parents are music lovers. My mom kind of wanted to be a Broadway musical person, so she was always singing Broadway musicals and playing those records. And my dad was kind of an amateur pianist and real jazz aficionado and classical music lover, and had quite a big record collection, including a bunch of old jazz shellacks that he had from when he was a kid, and stuff like that. Benny Goodman, original like quintet, old shellacks, and from him I got a real sort of respect. He had a hi-fi system.
Hi-fi, yep.
And a Dynaco, which he built himself.
Nice.
So he was kind of a hobbyist, and had this great record collection, and was always playing music, and would sit in his den. Both my parents were teachers. Mm-hmm. And we had this extra room that he had set up as a sort of a den, and had his hi-fi in there, and would sit there and smoke a pipe and listen to music very carefully. And I would conduct, when I was 2 or 3.
2 or 3, yeah.
Tchaikovsky and things like that, and dance. And it was always just around. But I remember by the time I was about 4 or 5, that they had a recording of the Sibelius violin concerto. And this piece has this very famous passage in the middle of it that's just sort of mind-blowing. It's just this gorgeous melody that comes out of nowhere. And it's just like this movie moment that just, everything just sort of explodes in this, moment of ecstasy. And I would just listen to that, and it would just blow my mind. I mean, it was like shooting heroin into my 5-year-old musical brain. I was just like, holy shit. And I guess I must have expressed that in some way to my parents, because shortly after that they started me on violin lessons.
Wow.
Turns out the guy down the street who played the violin, who was a concertmaster in a symphony, local symphony.
Cool.
Ronald Carbone. He's still around. We keep in touch. And he started giving me violin lessons when I was 5 years old, and it was always just something that I took to,
So it wasn't like you were, started piano, did some other instruments. It was just like violin from the get-go, and that's been your thing for your whole life.
That's pretty much all I know how to do.
So when you were you were young, you were taking lessons. Did you then continue to take lessons with the same guy? Get in bands or orchestras or?
Well, I kind of worked my way up through various teachers, and my dad's got me into Juilliard pre-college when I was 8.
Wow.
So I started studying there with a guy named Lewis Kaplan, who recently retired in his late 80s. Um, and and then we moved away, and I studied with a great teacher in Chicago, Morris Gomberg, and his assistant Deborah Wood, who's now Deborah Schwartz, who really taught me how to play the violin. It was right around in those years between about um, 11 and 16 when I was studying with her that I was practicing 3 hours a day, and she taught me how to practice, how to teach myself how to figure out puzzles, undo knots, things that, there's ways to do that. And good teachers know how to do that. And she taught me how to do that, which has made me a much better player and a much better teacher.
Yeah, I mean, can you distill what she was talking about there? Because, I'm learning guitar. I'd love to have any tips about.
Well, some of it was real common sense stuff, like, don't, if it's not fixed, don't leave it, you're not finished. So to have a certain work ethic, that was pretty rigorous. And just how to sort of suss out what the problem is. Why, if you're always making a mistake at a certain place, what's going on? And generally, like, she explained, there's usually a gap between what you think it is and what it really is.
Yeah.
And, if I was learning a piece, they would have me learn it in many different ways. Like I would learn all the names of the notes so I could recite the notes, like G or G, A, D, D, F, E, F, E, D, A, C, B, A, da, da, da. Like that. That's the Sibelius violin concerto opening. But so that I could recite the notes, then would be the fingerings: 3, 4, 1, 1, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 1. That kind of thing. Then what position are you in? Fourth position to third position. Da, da. So that I knew that piece from every possible angle. And if you were making a mistake, it usually just proved that you didn't go through that process and learn it exactly. What is it? Is your down bow or up bow? It's like just being aware of everything, so that if you're on stage and you suddenly go like, what am I doing? You know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So it was very rigorous kind of concert performing teaching.
Yeah. So then right off of that, you went to Juilliard?
Yep. So then I went to Juilliard and studied with Lewis Kaplan, the guy who I'd studied with in pre-college, and also with the great pedagogue Ivan Galamian, who was kind of wrote a bunch of books and is sort of the master teacher at Juilliard, who taught Dorothy DeLay, who then and also taught Itzhak Perlman, Pinker Zuckerman, and all of that. That whole line of great players that came out of New York. And I caught him right at the end of his career. Last year's, he died the year after I graduated.
So what type of music were you playing, in Juilliard, and after that, I guess you were, playing different places, and what was the trajectory to what you play now?
Yeah. So what ended up happening was, when I was doing all this practicing, my brother was listening to a lot of Led Zepp and all kinds of great, rock and roll popular music. And so I was really aware of all of that and the jazz that I grew up with my dad and stuff. And I was always composing music. And it occurred to me one day that all of these composers, all of these masterpieces, were all written by these composers in their popular style of the day. They were not writing 200-year-old style. They were writing the contemporary pop music, and it was just really good quality pop music. And so I started to realize that all of my friends in high school, they didn't know about the Sibelius Violin Concerto. They were listening to Led Zepp and Jimi Hendrix, and there was this disconnect that I felt between what I was doing and what was going on around me. And while I was at Juilliard, I started to really get into playing jazz and playing non-classical stuff. I sort of, realized that there was something else that I needed to do. I needed to figure out how to bridge this gap. So as soon as I stuck it out, I wanted to quit Juilliard and join a band, but my parents would talk me into getting the diploma. I'm glad I did.
Good idea.
Scares the shit out of my students. But as soon as I got out of school, I started joining rock bands and had to get an electric violin because my acoustic violin would feed back, and started building electric violins. And I started building them with 6 strings to go all the way down an octave lower so that I had that same bass register that a guitar had. And in this journey, I was taking this journey with a guy named Mark Wood, who was also at Juilliard, had gone to Juilliard for a semester and then left because he really knew better than I did what he had to do in life. And he's been making electric 6-string violins. He started making them right about the time that I wanted to get involved with that. And so we kind of joined forces and started making these crazy instruments. And my goal with them was to play with distortion and sound like an electric guitar. I would hold them real low down on across my chest, and play it like an electric guitar and play rhythm and sing. And I had rock bands where I purposely had no guitar in the band. It was just me, bass, and drums. And I wanted to prove that an electric violin could do everything that a guitar could do.
Cool.
And in the process, I ended up sort of teaching myself inadvertently how to use the bow in a way to kind of strum, because I was playing rhythm for myself while I was singing. And then I'd play lead when I wasn't singing. But this journey for about 10 years of being in rock bands and doing what I call my postgraduate work in clubs in New York City, like CBGBs and stuff. I was developing this style of using my bow that I now teach and call strum bowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. I listened to some of that, and it's really pretty wild, pretty amazing. It sounds really cool.
Sounds like a guitar. Most people go, well, what's the big deal? You're doing guitar players have been doing that for years. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's a little different on a violin.
Yeah.
First of all, you don't have frets. Second of all, you don't have a pick. And you don't have strings that are flat. You can't play more than 2 at a time, really, with a bow. And it's a whole different. Using a bow is a lot different than holding a pick.
Yeah. Sure. So here at that point you've been, playing violin and electric violin for 20, 30 years. Like why? And what is that? We talk about the power of music. What was that to you? What was really driving you at that point? The audiences, it was just an inner kind of a satisfaction.
Well, I'll tell you, because I've thought a lot about this, because this whole journey was based on the idea that I wanted to play music that my kids in high school would like. I wanted to play the violin so that it sounded like an electric guitar, because that is the voice of my generation. That is the voice that all my friends grew up listening to, whether it was Jimi Hendrix or Frank Zappa or Eric Clapton or Duane Allman or Carlos Santana. Everybody had a favorite guitar player. Mm-hmm. And that's the sound of sort of my generation and contemporary culture, much more so than a classical violin. And I wanted to speak in the musical language of my generation that surrounds us and our own musical culture. And the reason for that is because music is a language, and I didn't want to be speaking in an old-fashioned language. As beautiful as Bach is, and I play Bach every day because it's just beauty beyond belief. But as beautiful as that is, and as worthy as that is of attention and love and playing for many generations to come, it is not our contemporary dialect. And I didn't want to be speaking in an old-fashioned language because people, I just want to use this as a general audience target, the kids I went to high school with. It's going to sound old-fashioned to them. It's not going to strike them the same way. But that same emotion that you get in Sibelius, that same washing over you of ecstasy, you can get that in rock and roll. Hendrix got us there. And in a contemporary way that my friends would understand and would touch them in a way that Sibelius wouldn't touch them because it would just sound foreign to them. So that desire to touch people, to connect people in our own musical language, in the language that they understand, has driven my whole career. That's been the whole reason I've taken this strange journey of trying to get a violin to sound contemporary, to sound like a guitar.
Wow. And what you just said about you want to touch people and connect people. I mean, it's such powerful stuff, this music.
Oh.
And I guess when you get it, you want everybody to get it and hear it and understand that language and what it's saying.
Well, it's powerful enough that plenty of crazy orthodox religions ban it because it moves people whether you want it to or not. It goes directly to your emotional receptors of your brain and your physical receptors of your body. When you listen to a great groove, whether it's drummers from Mali or James Brown or whatever that groove is, it automatically, if you're alive, it makes your body move. That's part of my whole way I teach this thromboing thing. Rhythmic motion makes people respond. Rhythmic music makes people respond, with their bodies rhythmically. It's sort of like what you're doing to make the music, the way you're moving. People are going to kind of mimic that, whether they realize it or not. They're going to end up moving in the same way. And that connection between those sounds and beat and pulse and dance is almost something you can't move apart. You can't make a pulse kind of music without moving your body in that way. And you can't listen to it without kind of syncing up to it. So there's something going on there that's kind of subconscious. And then when you add to that the power of the human voice, or anything that imitates it, like an electric guitar or a saxophone, and the power of just simple chant without even harmony, just chant, melody, and what a melody can do, the way we use our voice to sing certain words in a way that expresses emotion in a way that you can't if you just read it on a piece of paper, because the tone of voice is everything. And that tone of voice is what music is. That's the difference between literature, and music. Literature does not have the same ability to convey tone of voice the way a melody can. You hear somebody sing something and you know what they mean. It's like body language. It just speaks for itself. So, and then, if you complicate things by adding harmony and the way that manipulates
and rhythm and
adding all the rhythm and the melody and then harmony to that and the way that manipulates our psyche, you got a pretty potent substance there that can really target your emotional brain.
Yeah, well, man, Tracy, you're describing this so well that I find myself, I'm just kind of moving around in my chair here. So are there, and it's a fabulous description sort of just the inherent power of music. You've been playing, in front of audiences for forever. You've been teaching students, playing with other musicians. Do you have other instances or things people have said to you or things that you've seen that also kind of demonstrate the effects that music have on people in their lives?
Well, I think it's interesting the way music is being used differently these days. It's almost like, so many young people use music in a sort of a background way, right? It's just sort of on a Spotify playlist that's kind of running
right
while they're working out or studying or driving or things like that. And I'm not sure if that kind of desensitizes us to the power of it, when it used to be kind of a bigger deal to put on a record and it was silent in between putting on that record, and then you listen to something and then you had to get up and turn it, or you just let it go, and you were back to silence. And I'm not sure I'm answering your question directly, but I think people listen to music differently nowadays, and the whole idea of being affected. Well, I don't know. I certainly see my kids affected by the pop music they listen to, so they're not, maybe they're listening to it a little more carefully than I think.
So I know one of the projects that you've been working on, or I don't know if you could call it a project, but playing with Rory Futureman Wooten.
Oh yeah.
And he is, I met him down at Wooten Woods, and hopefully going to interview him this year at Wooten Woods. He said we'd do it maybe under the pavilion, like when I interviewed Michael and all that. But he has a pretty profound take on life and music too. What would you say about your project with Roy?
Well, Roy is such a wonderful person to play with. He's one of those people who I just kind of like to be on stage with because his vibe is just so true.
Yeah.
He doesn't get caught up in a lot of nonsense. When it comes to music, it's just kind of like, boom, here I am. I like, he's one of those guys. I have this kind of expression that I get to say to myself when somebody's really got, seems to be locked in, that they're hardwired to the muse. It just seemed like, like Stevie Wonder, it just seems like everything he does, even his worst song, even, No New Year's Day, even like a song like that was just freaking horrible. When he sings it, it's like, man, he means it. He actually does. He finds the way to the soul in the most saccharine setting you can imagine. He still finds his way to, because he's just hardwired to that. There's no, there's no other way that he can be. He doesn't have a choice. He can't just, walk away from that. He's plugged into that and is all the time in that state. And I feel like Roy is like that. Anytime I talk with him, he's there. He's 100% in that musical reception, kind of open-minded, non-judgmental way that musicians are when they're on stage and when they're or in a room together playing, and when they're just like not being egotistical, they're just being musical.
Oh, yeah, that's cool, man. I'd love to. I mean, how do you tap into the muse? How do you how do you do that?
Well, that's why I like having him around, because he reminds me to just sometimes just shut up all the things that are running through your brain and just focus on the sound that's coming out of your instrument. Focus on that voice and that beat and that groove, and just let your body do what it wants to do to help you, and just basically stop talking to yourself. I think it's a big part of it for me.
Oh, yeah, I can understand that. Stop talking to yourself. So, we've got this little Planetary Gig Society. I've been doing these podcasts, and part of the reason for that is to get the conversation, not to get it going, but just to, add to, supplement, just have conversations about the power of music and how we can tap into music to have a better world somehow, whatever we can do. What do you think about that? Are there ways to do that? Can we do that? How do people do that? What effects can we have through music, or what are you trying to do?
Well, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. I kind of I go through I torture myself every once in a while with this idea that, what am I doing wasting my life being so selfish and just having this kind of vanity career of playing music and traveling around and trying to, promote myself in all the various ways that independent artists have to promote themselves. And And it sure seems like a pretty useless, self-serving way to be spending my life when I look at people who are, doctors or helping homeless people and
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
things that are
nurses.
actually
Yeah.
gonna help somebody in the world. And I'm like, geez, and look at me. I'm spending my time thinking, hey, what shirt's gonna look better on stage, and and I struggle with this. I do. Almost every year I come to the point where, like, geez, I should just quit and do something real and worthwhile. And I keep having to remind myself that what I'm doing is worthwhile. It does have some meaning to some people. Um, it's a little hard to really believe that, but um, what makes it easier is that I think about my own life and why I'm doing what I'm doing and how music affected me as a kid. Um, what it is that I love about being in this place in a career where I can just be that way and be in that mode, be in that kind of vulnerable, childlike place so much of my time. I've arranged my life to do that, so there must be something about that I really like, and therefore probably other people like too. So, and um, gosh, who was it? Carlos Santana said something really great that I put on the album liner of my, one of my records. I covered one of his tunes, Europa. He said something like, as a guitar player, when you hold that note and just that way, you touch somebody's umbilical cord. You're touching their
Whoa.
very soul. And that's an incredible responsibility in a way, to have access to that and to not abuse it. It's to know that maybe something that I played somewhere along the way on one record, one track somewhere, there's a moment in Miles Davis' Blue and Green when he goes up for this note. And he just hits that note, and that just touches my umbilical cord. And to just think that, if I gave one of those notes in my whole career, if I just managed to get one of those on tape and somebody else heard it, then I don't know. I guess I did give somebody pleasure. I did something good. I didn't, I'm not a neurosurgeon. I didn't cure somebody's back problems, but,
But it does, that's so well said, but it doesn't seem like it's selfish in saying, I want to touch your umbilical cord because I want you to do this or that. It's really touching them to open something up in them.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's what art is, isn't it? It's it's a way of sharing your way of looking at the world with someone else. It's like, here's my experience. The world looks like this to me, Picasso. And other people look at it and go, wow, that's what the world looks like to you? You're crazy, man. That is some cool shit. Um, and, musically, maybe it's a little different. There are certain moments that, or feelings or emotions that, that we can bring up in people. And, those are very real things that everybody has locked in their brains. And, to get them to experience the world and to stop what they're doing for a second, to stop talking to themselves and to listen to something for a moment and to feel something and to go, hey, I managed to get you to stop talking and feel something. And that's, I think, what everybody, really wants.
Yeah.
Not everybody ready for it all the time. They close themselves off to it. But, um, you know, when people really listen to music, they want something that's going to make them feel something. Otherwise, why bother?
Yeah, absolutely. So you live there in Nashville, and
Yeah.
there's quite a music community there.
Yes.
Started
Yes.
way back, and I'm sure
I live just right down the road from Bela Fleck. We're just right off the same road.
Oh my God! And you know, I guess it's changed over the years and gotten even more profound than before. But it's quite a community, you know, in the same way that maybe, you know, we can make a better world a little bit through music. How you think it's possible, or, you know, expanding that community of musicians, that community of people who love music or realize they love music and the power of music? Think that's something to even aspire to, or?
You know, the whole frequency of people getting together for music. I don't know. I guess, you know, the clubs are still plenty alive, and people do that, and you know, places where people are going to listen, not just to go to a bar where there's music, but actually going to listen to what's going on and stuff. There's actually quite a bit of that in Nashville, and there are all these songwriter rounds, and it's one of the things about Nashville, I think, that's kind of different from a lot of other places, is that there's a very welcoming community among musicians, songwriters, that's actually pretty supportive, and which is a rare thing, because musicians tend to protect their turf, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate, but you know, people get competitive, and you know, when there's not a lot going on, especially, but when there's so much going on in a town like Nashville, it's just really easy for people to network and things like that. And I think, you know, the way music really does become a social instrument for social good, in a way that's not just, you know, one person sitting at home with their headphones on and really digging music, which is certainly doing a social good, because somebody's a lot less likely to be, you know, in a war if they're listening to a, you know, Beethoven symphony with their headphones on. But I think, you know, this whole idea of, you know, people going out and listening to something together and sharing that experience together and deciding together whether something was or whoa, you know, and feeling that energy, and just, you know, having a chance to meet each other and talk to each other in a way that's kind of non-threatening, which is a really important part of the whole, you know, vibe, when it's a good vibe, like it is here generally in Nashville. You know, I think that does a whole lot of good in the world, but I don't know, it's sort of on a micro, not a macro level.
I really appreciate it, your passion for the music and what you've been doing. It's been a great conversation. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to talk about, or something I didn't ask about.
Know, we could chat about this stuff all day long.
Well,
but I'll leave that for my friend Roy Wooten. He will definitely have a few things to say.
All right, so I just want to thank you very much, Tracy, for taking the time and really sharing your thoughts, and just really appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you down there in Nashville someday soon.
I hope so, man. It's been a pleasure, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay. Really, thank you very much. Tracy Silverman, everybody. Thank you. You've been listening to Planetary Gig Talk, Tales of Music and Magic. I'm your host, Jefferson Glassy, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gig Society. We talk with musicians and others about the power of music and how we can use music to help create a better world. Please check out our website, www.planetarygigs.org, for information about some of the organizations promoting music and musicians, resources about the power of music, books, movies, articles, including new research on music and the brain. We welcome your support. The Planetary Gig Society is a Section 501c3 charitable organization, and you can donate on the website. You also can receive a free email signature block demonstrating your support for Planetary Gig Society. Please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Planetary Gigs. And we want to thank fabulous musician and teacher Eric Weinberg of Little Eric Studios for the Planetary Gig Talk music titled Chill Kid, It's Saul. So please check out Planetary Gig Talk on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Subscribe and hear all the upcoming episodes. Thanks very much.